Hi, I'm David Lewis, and I love talking about psychology, which is a good thing, seeing as how I'm a psychology instructor. But the reason why I like psychology so much is because it's really the science of me. It's the science of why I do certain things, why I feel certain ways. It's all about just understanding yourself better. So that's personally what I find so interesting about psychology, is that, I want to learn more about myself. So over the next series of videos, we're going to go into detail on all different aspects of human behavior, human thought, feelings, personality, mental disorder, social interactions, pretty much everything you could ever imagine. So I hope you get as much enjoyment. I hope you're as, interested in the subject of yourself as I am. The word psychology can be defined as the scientific study of mental activity and behavior, which are both based on biological processes in the brain. So when it comes to studying behavior, that's something that's fairly easy to study. You just watch a person and take notes. But when it comes to studying mental activity, traditionally in psychology, we've had some difficulty with that. Like, you can't just look at a person's brain and tell what they're thinking. So you can't directly measure human thought in that sense. But actually, you kind of can. Nowadays we have such advanced brain imaging technology that we can literally put a person into a machine and watch their thoughts in action. Now, we haven't gotten to the point yet where we know exactly what the person is thinking in perfect detail, but we do have enough, accuracy to be able to get a general idea of what that person must be thinking about. But if you break the word psychology down into its two parts, psyche and ology, well, psyche means mind, and ology or logos means study. So you could also just call psychology the study of the mind. So one of the first questions most students who take this course have is, what kind of jobs are out there in psychology? Like, what kind of career options do you have? And I just want to say there's a pretty wide variety, but unfortunately, for pretty much any of the jobs I'm about to talk about, you're going to need at least a master's degree. So that means after you finish, your traditional 4 years of undergraduate, you're going to have to do at least another 2 years on top of that before you can get one of these positions. But of course, for the highest paying positions, for the highest prestigious kind of positions, a master's degree is not going to be enough. You're going to need to have at least a PhD. So if you have some kind of degree in psychology, you could get a job doing one of the following things. Like, maybe you could conduct some scientific research in a laboratory, or maybe out in the field. You could be a teacher, like myself, and teach at a college or university. You could work for a major company and try to help them improve the efficiency of their business. Maybe you could work for a major sports team and help to train the athletes on specific motor skills, or maybe help them recover from injury. You could work for companies or the government when it comes to trying to influence people, trying to persuade people to do certain things and buy certain products. You could also work as like a counselor type, where you're just kind of trying to help people live happier, healthier lives. I could keep going. There's a huge long list of all the different positions in psychology, but the main point I'm trying to make here is that it's not just about treating people with mental illness. A lot of us, when we first hear the word psychology, we tend to think, oh, it's, dealing with crazy people. Yeah, that's part of it, but that's just a tiny little fraction of what's out there in psychology. But if you are interested in a mental health position, there are a few different options. For example, you could try to become a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is somebody who uses medical treatments to help people with mental disorder. So typically you can think of like pills, for example. The bad news, if you're interested in being a psychiatrist, is that it has the most demanding educational requirements. So you're going to have to go to 4 years of medical school at least, followed by 3 to 5 years of specialization in mental disorder. And the degree you'll get at the end of that is a medical degree, because you're a medical doctor that specializes in mental disorder. But as you can imagine, it's not so easy to get a medical degree. If you want to stay in the psychology, direction, taking courses like this, getting a degree in psychology and then moving on to a job, you could be a clinical psychologist. So that's a person who treats people with mental disorders, but uses psychological treatments instead of medical treatments. So that's also going to require about 5 to 7 years of education. And depending on the degree, like there's two kinds. You have a PhD, which is more research-based, and then there's a PsyD, which is more treatment-based. So, but just depending on the degree and depending on where you go, in total it's probably going to take you about 7 years after you finish your undergraduate studies. Another option is counseling psychologist. A counseling psychologist is somebody who focuses on treating problems, more, you could say, like less severe problems, just like marital issues, adjustment issues, learning disorders, that kind of stuff. It's not like full-blown mental disorder, but the person is clearly distressed. So that's what a counseling psychologist is going to help people with. Now, that also is going to require about 5 to 7 years of graduate school after you finish your undergraduate studies. And you'll also get a PhD at the end of that, but it's less research focused, I suppose you could say. Then you have other positions that you can get with a master's degree, like a psychiatric social worker, which is somebody who just works within communities to try to help people get access to the resources and the assistance that they need to solve more general problems. And that, like most master's degrees, only really takes 2 to 3 years after you finish your undergraduate. And there's some other ones like psychiatric nurses and paraprofessionals, which basically just means somebody who provides psychological help but doesn't really have a degree for it. So there's many different options out there, but those are the major ones. Now, if you are interested in doing research is definitely the aspect of psychology I'm the most interested in. Like, please don't send me an email about your problems. I'm not that kind of psychologist. So if you are interested in doing research, though, there's many different major topics that are quite popular nowadays, like cognitive processes, things like how memory works, how people learn and use language, how people understand and perceive the world around them. You could also study biological stuff, like how human behavior is related to biological processes, like neurotransmitters and neurons and all the chemicals going on in your brain and stuff. You could also look at development. Development's also a very popular research topic nowadays, so mostly focusing on little babies and how they gain the skills and master the abilities that they need to. But there's so many different directions you could go. Like, you could study things like learning, you could study things like animal behavior. Like, a lot of times when we study animals, we're comparing them to humans. You could look at gender differences, you could look at ethnic differences, cultural differences. But no matter what kind of research you want to do, no matter what direction you go, the goals of psychological research are always going to be the same. And honestly, these are the goals of all science. So no matter what science you do, you're going to want to accomplish one or more of these goals. And they're hierarchical. So the first goal, the first thing you want to do when you start studying something is describe it. So description is the first goal in science. Just identify and classify those human behaviors or thought processes that you find interesting. Explain them as clearly as possible. The second goal is explanation. So now we are explaining why people do these things, explaining why people have these mental processes. So after you can describe the behavior, then now you should try to explain why people do it in the first place. The third goal, if you can finish the first two, would be prediction. So if we can describe and explain human behavior, obviously we should be able to then predict it. So we should be able to offer predictions or hypotheses about how people will act given certain conditions. And if we can predict human behavior, we can take it to the last step. And so this would be the fourth goal of influence or control. So it sounds kind of scary. It kind of sounds like there's some, group of people with white lab coats plotting against us. No, it's definitely not anything, dramatic like that. It's just people trying to come up with better ways to influence people's behavior to do things that they want them to. Like, for example, if you've ever seen a television commercial or an internet commercial, that's influence. They are trying to manipulate you. They are trying to get you to do something. It's usually, buy some product or whatever. But that's the whole idea of influence. It's just trying to, in general, make the world a better place by getting people to engage in more pro-social, more helpful kinds of behaviors. Research in general, no matter what field you go into, has two basic flavors, you could say, two basic types. So there's basic research, which is just about learning stuff. It's about seeking new knowledge, trying to just advance general scientific understanding. And most research is definitely basic in that sense. Like, a lot of the research we're going to talk about this semester is basic research. But when you start to want to solve real problems, like when you look at the real world and you try to fix things in the real world, now what you're doing is called applied research. So with applied research, you're trying to solve practical problems, just improve the quality of people's lives, basically. And most applied research has its origins in basic research. So they've just taken something that was discovered and now they're applying it to solve some real world problem. Now, here is a chart of some of the major branches of psychology. And I've color-coded them so that you can tell which ones are more basic and which ones are more applied. So the blue ones are the more basic ones and the red ones are the more applied ones. But just in general, you could do basic or applied research in any of these domains. But let me just quickly run through them so you have a general sense of what each one is about. Abnormal psychology is the study of unusual patterns of behavior and thought. It's the study of crazy people, to put it simply. Things like schizophrenia, bipolar, antisocial personality, and so on. Behavioral psychology is the study of how humans and animals learn, how humans and animals gain new skills. It's mostly based on how animals respond to stimuli in the environment. Biological psychology, which is also oftentimes called like behavioral neuroscience, that's the study of the physiological, genetic, and developmental factors that influence human behavior and thought. So how brain stuff makes you do stuff, basically. Clinical psychology, I've already talked about that. It's basically mental health. So the treatment and study of mental illness is what clinical psychology is all about. Cognitive psychology is definitely the one that I would best fit in. So cognitive psychology is the study of thought processes like attention, problem solving, perception, memory, and language. Like my own research that I've done for my PhD has been in sensation and perception, and to a certain extent, memory. So we do a lot of brain imaging research in cognitive psychology, so using techniques like functional magnetic resonance imaging. Then there's comparative psychology, which is the study of behavior and thought processes of many different animals. Some of the animals we use most often would be various primates and rodents. We also sometimes use birds and dogs. But this research we oftentimes want to use animals in research when we're doing some study that would either be impractical or unethical to do with human subjects. Cultural psychology, that's just the study of how a person's thoughts and behavior are affected by their culture. So we tend to just get groups of people from different cultures and compare them. So we're looking for those cross-cultural differences. Developmental psychology, I already briefly mentioned this. So this is a study of how, people change over their lifespan. So we mostly focus on little babies and how they gain their new mental capabilities, like how they learn to walk, how they learn to talk, how they learn to just understand what other people are thinking and feeling. Like, all of this is really popular nowadays. Educational psychology, that's the study of how children learn, how teachers teach, how the classroom works, and similar kinds of topics. So an educational psychologist is basically somebody who's just observing this process of education and trying to potentially improve it in many different ways. Then there's environmental psychology. That's the study of how humans interact with and are influenced by their environment. So oftentimes the research in this domain is focused on trying to solve environmental problems, like encouraging recycling, for example. Then there's evolutionary psychology. That's just the study of how humans' behavior and thought processes today have been influenced by the survival, adaptation needs of our ancestors. So, for example, if your ancestors were, not fearful of a spider, for example, then they probably would have died off and you wouldn't be here today. That's just a brief example, but we'll go into more detail about this in another presentation. Then there's forensic psychology. You could basically just think of a forensic psychologist as the psychologist in the courtroom. This is somebody who just works within the justice system to try to disseminate our findings in psychological research. Then there's health psychology. That's just the study of human behavior and thought processes when it comes to health, illness, and healthcare settings. So health psychologists tend to focus on just trying to help people change their state of mind, change their thoughts, because it's well known that things like stress can definitely play a major role on your health, your physical health. Then there's industrial organizational psychology, which is focused on the optimization of the workplace environment, so trying to improve efficiency. Then there's personality psychology, which is the study of characteristic individual differences. So we oftentimes use like a pen and paper personality test when we're assessing a person's personality. There's positive psychology, the study of the psychological characteristics that enable individuals and communities to thrive in the face of adversity. This is the most recently added branch of psychology, and it should seem very appropriate that this was primarily founded in San Francisco. Then there's quantitative psychology, which is basically statistics. So quantitative psychology is the study of methods and techniques for conducting psychological research. The primary focus is on just developing better forms of measurement for the data and better ways to design studies. Then there's school psychology, which is, you can think of as the clinical psychologist in the classroom. Like children with learning disorders, children with behavioral disorders, that might be referred to the school psychologist, where they would just go in and sit down and they would work together to try to overcome these problems. Then there's social psychology, which is personally, I think, one of the most interesting branches. So social psychology is all about how human thought and behavior can be affected by other people. So how your own feelings, how your own thoughts can be manipulated and influenced by other people. So common research topics in social psychology include things like obedience, conformity, persuasion, mimicry, social roles, social norms, and so on. We're going to go into a lot of detail into social psychology near the end of the video series. There's sports psychology, study of how athletic performance is influenced by psychological factors. So it's also involved in the treatment of various like sports-related disorders and injuries. And now, just to explain something, I wanted to show you this graph. So this graph just shows many of the different kinds of jobs you could get in psychology. The one on the far left with a really, really nice looking yearly pay, that would of course be psychiatrist, a medical doctor. It should make perfect sense. If you have a medical degree, then you're going to be making a lot of money. But as you can tell, it quickly drops down and tails off. It's once you get to the end of the spectrum, it's pretty kind of sad looking, honestly. And just to illustrate a point, this is where I would fit on the spectrum. So yeah, I'm not rolling in the cash is all I'm trying to say.